Hello and welcome to the Life Coaching on the Move podcast. I am Fiske, and each week I will discuss a different life subject that is relevant to each and every one of us. I will include thought-provoking experiences both from my own life and from the hundreds of people I've coached over the years. I will give you essential tips and strategies that you can use in your everyday lives in order to grow your inner confidence, achieve your goals, feel happier in life, have better relationships and social skills, and a much higher sense of self-esteem and worth. I'll be on your team, coaching and supporting you along the way, reminding you of what works and what to avoid. You can tap into the podcast wherever you are and whenever you feel it would help. And together we will keep you on track, focused, constantly moving forward and improving with much more determination, feeling the way you deserve to feel, and generally achieving overall increased happiness in your life. Welcome along. So, without any further hesitation, let's move on to this week's subject. Banishing toxic thinking for good. Toxic thinking is very, very negative. It's very disempowering. It's very toxic, hence the title. Doesn't help you at all. And actually, I find that the more confidence a person lacks, the more likely they are to fall into these traps and run quite toxic thinking patterns. This follows on from last week, really, where we talked about what does that inner parrot say to us, what sorts of thoughts are we running, what are we saying without really consciously being aware of it. And what I do when I'm working one-to-one with a person is very much listen to their language patterns, because that reveals to me what sorts of things they're saying in their head. So I often pick them up on, did you hear yourself say X, Y, Z? Quite disempowering thought beliefs. And often they don't realise they've even said it. Sometimes I'll even say, there is something that you have said numerous times throughout today's coaching, which I think is holding you back. What do you think that repeat thought is? And they're often completely unaware. They've done it so much without thinking. So what I'm going to do today is share with you the common toxic thinking patterns, give you little examples, both maybe from myself, my own examples, or from those of clients, to explain what I mean by each of them. And I want you to be able to see what one or two or more do you relate to, if any. If any of them hook in with you and resonate, then perhaps that's something a trap you've been falling into, and one that as a result of this podcast, we can work on you banishing. So the first one is called all or nothing thinking. This is where you feel that you can't do one thing, therefore you can't do anything. The example I give to back this one up is of a student that I was coaching, one-on-one coaching. She was around 14 or 15. Her parents had brought her to work with me because they were worried about her beliefs around exams. What had happened, she was a very bright girl, very intelligent, very clever girl, and she had been consistently straight A student until last year, when at the end of her year exams, she failed one of them. And from that, it hit her hard and she lost her confidence, really. She had now the belief that she had failed this exam, she can't do exams. And when I was working with her one-on-one, she expressed it insofar as she said, I can do tests in the classroom, I'm okay in there, I don't mind that environment, I know my stuff, I've worked hard, I've revised, and I do really well in the classroom. But if you put me in the exam conditions, i.e. in the sports hall, under timed silent conditions for 2 hours, pick up your pen now, she believes that she goes to pieces and she can't do exams. Well, bearing in mind she's 14, 15, she's coming up for GCSEs. And this was why her parents contacted me. We very much had to unpick this, because how was she ever going to enter GCSEs and do well with that disempowering belief? I can't do exams. I freeze. I can't think of the answers. My mind goes blank. She was running all of these beliefs as I was working with her. So what you have to do with all or nothing thinking, and if this is something that you fall into, it's very, very important to look for counter evidence, because once we get a belief system, our subconscious then works with us, seeking confirmation. It will seek evidence. There you are. See, I failed that exam. See, I'm rubbish at this. I'm rubbish at all of this. And it will only spot confirming evidence. So what I had to do with her, and what you need to do if you do fall in this trap, is to look for other evidence. So for her, she was actually in a private school, so she had to have taken entrance exams. So I got her to look at that reality, how well, in fact, she did in all of her entrance exams. I then got her to consider her end of first form exams at that school and how hugely successful she had been. All of these were in exam conditions. I had to keep re-emphasising that she had consistently done well previously in that exact environment. Then looked at year 2, second form exams. She did phenomenally well there. And so on. And I had to break down that belief system and give her lots of counter evidence to prove that it was wrong. And then get into perspective the fact that it had just been one exam in that one condition, whereas there were many others in the same condition where she had done very, very well. I had to break that belief, that new belief, that she couldn't do exams in exam conditions any longer. So for you, if this is you and you feel I failed at this, or I'm no good at this, I can't do it, anything, you've got to look for counter evidence, and I promise you it will be there without doubt. You've just got to make your subconscious go and search for it and notice only that, and don't keep reinforcing that first toxic thought. The second one that we can sometimes fall into is called overgeneralizations, where we use the words always or never. We completely overgeneralize. So this will always happen to me. I'm never any good at this or that. So if you hear yourself in your language using the word always or never, you are almost certainly falling into this trap. The example I give here for the always is actually a personal example of my own. When I was training to be a coach, or actually when I was training in NLP, which is a little bit of what we're doing now, so adding to my coaching skills, I didn't know all of this, but I had to be coached by somebody. I had to have NLP coaching as part of the training. And you have to be coached on real subjects. You can't role play. It just doesn't work. It's not effective. So I was working with the coach, and this is exactly how it happened. It took 2 minutes to move me from feeling awful to feeling much better. And I'll explain how she did it. So I walked in and she said, "So what are we concentrating on today?" And I said to her, "Well, I'd like to work on becoming a better mother. I don't think I'm a very good mother." And she said, "Oh, okay. Why? What's happening? Tell me all about what's happening at the moment for you to think that." And I said, "Well, I'm just always shouting at the children." And she heard the word always. She knew I was overgeneralizing and instantly jumped on it. Of course, I didn't know all of this then and hadn't seen it for what it was worth. So she said, "Always?" And I said, "Well, no, not always." And she said, "Well, okay, how often then?" And I said, well, I stopped to think, and she gave me the time, and it went quiet, and I dug deep, worked it all out. And I said to her, well, it's mostly first thing in the morning when the children, they were still young at that time, when the children, despite me asking 4 or 5 times, "Have you got your shoes on? Have you got your coats? Where are your school rucksacks? Have you brushed your teeth?" They've done none of those things. And they're still sat on the floor building Lego or playing with their cars or whatever. And by now, the school minibus, the little school minibus parks at the top of our garden, that's where the bus stop is, that would be sat there and about to pull away when I would up my ante and become a bit of a fishwife and do a little bit of hollering. And she said, "Oh, okay, that fair enough. And so what percentage of the day is that then?" And I really stopped to think at that point and realised about 1%. And she said, "So, not always then." I instantly felt so much better because I had overgeneralized and felt I was a rubbish mother at all times in all scenarios. And by her checking the reality of that situation with me, I instantly then felt it much better, much more capable, more self-esteem. And I'd got context, I'd got some perspective on that issue. So she then instantly went into solution mode and said, so what can you do about that then? And of course, I realised that I'm the adult, the parent. I need to get them up earlier, get them moving sooner, and in fact, actually aim to have them out at the bus stop with their shoes and bags and waiting for the bus rather than the other way around. So she solved that problem within 2 minutes. She moved me from feeling awful and a failure to feeling solution mentality, on top of things, much better about myself and greater confidence. This is what overgeneralizations will do for us negatively, and we have to stop that, and we have to get things in perspective and check the reality of that situation. Another example I give of the overgeneralization where the word never is used. I was running a big workshop for a large group of delegates, and the tables were laid out in an open U shape, and I was walking up the middle, handing out some sheets to all of them. And I was saying, we have done lots of theory now. I'm handing out this exercise, and I'd like you now to write yourself some goals for the next 12 months. And as I walked past one particular delegate, I heard her say, oh, I've done this before. This never works for me. I never achieve my goals. And I heard the word never and the overgeneralization. Now, I could have left it, but how would she have tackled that task? And would she really have then left that workshop with the full intention and commitment of going out there and achieving her goals? I suspect not. So I turned to her, and her body language revealed it all. She was sat back in her chair, arms crossed, the pen was down on the desk. She wasn't really attending to the sheet at all. And I said to her, what, never? And she said, no, I've done it before. It never works. I said, oh gosh, that's interesting. So are you in a career at the moment? Do you have a job? Yes. Oh, how did you get that job? What did you have to apply for a role, put a CV together, perhaps attend an interview and beat off some competition? Did you need to have certain qualifications for it, or was it a family friend that just gave you the role? Did you just land it? And she said, no, I had to work for it. I applied for it and had interviews and everything like that. And I said, oh, okay, excellent. What about driving? Are you driving a car at all? And she said, yeah, I drove here tonight. And I said, oh, how did that happen? Did you have to, revise and learn your theory test and pass that and take driving lessons and practice and then save for a car, maybe go and choose a car, get insurance and so on and so forth? Did you have to put some effort into it and work hard for it, or did it just come to you? And she said, no, I worked really hard. Okay. What about living at the moment? Are you still at home with your parents, or have you moved out, got your own place or anything like that? And then she realised what I was doing. And with a wry smile on her face, she looked at me and she said, no, I've moved out now. And I said to her, so do you never achieve your goals? And as she uncrossed her arms and sat up straight and picked her pen up, she said, yeah, I suppose I do really. And then approached that task with a completely different mindset, and I suspect left that workshop with complete commitment to achieving her goals that she'd written for herself. So it changes the whole way we approach things, and much more likely to achieve things and get things done if we get context and get perspective and do not overgeneralize in a negative way. The third one that we can fall victim to is minimizing the positives. Minimizing those compliments or that positive feedback that we get, or the thanks and the sincere gratitude that we get for doing a job well done. So often when we get if we are lacking confidence and we're given a compliment, you'll often hear the person sort of say, oh, well, this old thing, I've had this in for ages in the back of the wardrobe, or it cost nothing, it was in one of those cheap shops, or Or we'll say something like, they only said that to be kind. They didn't really mean it, or they're just being polite. Or we really minimise the positives, and that is such a great shame. It's risky and courageous, actually, to sometimes give a compliment, particularly if it's a stranger. So it would be really nice to be able to look them in the eye and smile and say, oh, thank you, I'm glad you like it, or thank you, you're very welcome, or whatever the context is that they've given you that praise or that compliment or that feedback. So it's nice for them to be able to thank them and accept it. They gave it as a gift. We've accepted it. If somebody gave us a present all beautifully wrapped and we just handed it back to them and said, I don't want it, I don't want a present, and handed it back, that would be seen as really, really rude. But it's a similar thing. So instead we need to soak it up. Take it for what it was worth. It was meant positively. Take it positively and enjoy it. Most importantly, if they said you look good, you look great, you did a great job, enjoy that moment and let it sink in. Maybe even record it in your notebook. So you've got a little page dedicated to compliments or positive feedback that you've got. Because then when you have a bad day or a wobble, you can refer to it when you're having a self-doubting moment. You can read back on those and they can have a double whammy, really. So don't minimise the positives. Learn to accept them graciously and learn to enjoy them. The next one is the should statements. And in fact, when I'm coaching people, I ban the word should. I say to clients, please don't should on yourself, because the word should really just puts us under immense pressure with high expectations. So if you hear yourself or somebody say, yeah, but I should be good at this, or I should be a perfect wife or husband, or I should be liked by everybody, or no, says who? And that's what I say to clients, says who? And it's actually us saying it to ourselves. And all it does is beat us over the head with a very large hammer, sets us up for failure, puts us under intense pressure, and makes us feel a failure, because we quite often cannot rise to those high expectations. Instead, I say use the word could, replace it with could. I could be the perfect husband or wife, or the perfect daughter, or I could be good at this. But you could also be a human being and cut yourself some slack. Take some pressure off yourself. I could be the perfect daughter, but not this weekend. We can't do this weekend, but we could come and visit you next weekend. We've got a lot less on. So it's cutting yourself some slack and not putting yourself under that pressure. So ban the word should, replace it with could. Everyone shouldn't like you, and everybody will never like you. Even the nicest possible people in the world are not liked by everybody. Princess Diana, Oprah Winfrey, Mother Teresa, not everybody liked those people, even with what they did do and achieve. So no one is going to be liked by everybody. You may be the nicest, kindest person, the most positive person in the world, but that will intensely annoy some people. And that's their stuff and your stuff. It's okay. The next one is jumping to conclusions. This one I think is quite a biggie. I think this one is possibly the most damaging of all of them. And I think it's on the increase because I'm seeing it more and more. In adults who I work with during the week mostly, I see this a fair amount, but I see it a lot in the teenagers as well that I work with, more and more so. And for teenagers in particular, I think this is a big damaging belief system and it has to go. So jump into conclusions where you hear people say, but they'll all think I'm stupid. There's no point me talking in the meeting or saying anything or contributing because they'll think my comments rubbish, or they'll laugh at me, or they'll think I'm silly or whatever. That's such a disempowering belief system. In fact, I was working with a teenager recently who said, I was walking along and a few of my classmates were all stood in a group, and as I walked along past them, I know that they started talking about me, and then they all erupted into big laughter. and I know that they were saying something about me. And I said, well, how do you know that they were saying something about you? Did you hear anything? What did they say? And he said, no, I didn't hear anything, but I just know they were talking about me. And I said, but how do you know? He said, well, it was just the way as I walked past, and then a few seconds later, it was just big laughter. And I said, well, had they been talking and looking at you beforehand? No, they were looking at their phones. And I said, well, okay, so perhaps it was something else. Perhaps, in fact, they were all looking at YouTube or some funny video footage or cat videos or something like that, and then they all laughed. Oh, could have been, I suppose, but I don't know. He hadn't considered other options. I had a lady contact me for career coaching, and in she walked and she said, I need your help. I've got to change my job. I need to get out of my job. I need you to help with putting a CV together and preparing me for interviews. I haven't had an interview in quite a long time and I'm nervous. Okay, well, tell me all about it. Tell me what it is about your job that you like, that you want to find elsewhere, and what it is about your job that you don't like and the reason for leaving. And she said, oh, no, I do really like my job, but I've got to go because nobody there likes me. Oh gosh, that's a biggie, isn't it? What's happened then? What have they done? And she said, what do you mean? Well, they haven't done anything. And I said, oh, okay, well, what have they said then? Well, they haven't said anything. And I said, well, how do you know that they don't like you? And so she said, well, I just, sometimes they don't include me, and they don't include me in the conversation. I work in a large room with 6 of us. It's all open plan, and I know they don't like me. So I needed her to check the reality of this situation. I believed she was jumping to conclusions, because what happens, we get a little thought in our mind and then we're convinced that's the truth. We don't check the reality and we don't consider other possibilities. Like the lad walking along. He thought they were talking about him. He was therefore certain they were. This lady got at some point a thought that they hadn't included her in a particular conversation, and then that old subconscious again searches for further evidence in the future. Keep searching and you will find, and that for her just confirmed they just don't like me. And it becomes a reality then. So I set her the task, the key takeaway or the homework for the next week, to go back to work for a week, and with her notebook in her drawer, I wanted her to record every single time they did include her in something, whether it was the coffee run, include her with, do you want to walk into town at lunchtime, go and get a sandwich? Did you watch so-and-so on the TV last night? What are you doing this weekend? Did you have a nice weekend? Any of those things. Every single one of them I wanted her to record. And only those, not the negatives. And she came back the next week and she had pages full of examples of when they had. And I sat her down and said, so how did it go? And she looked at me and smiled and she said, they do like me. And that was brilliant for her. And she ended up staying in her role, which was far easier and much better for her. That's what she wanted. And she was much, much happier. And I suspect she then changed her behaviour towards them. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for the few weeks before she came for coaching. I suspect she was probably a little bit cold, a little bit withdrawn, a little bit sulky, or quiet, because she'd got this belief. Now that she'd looked for other evidence or looked for confirming evidence and got reality on the situation, I suspect a whole persona will have changed in the office and the atmosphere will have improved and they would have got a lot better reaction from her. Now, that was a gamble. It might have been that she'd come back for coaching and there was no evidence. They hadn't included her. And in fact, she'd confirmed her suspicion that they in fact didn't like her. And if that had happened, then we would have worked next on why they didn't like her, and what had she been doing, how had she been treating them, how had she been reacting, how had she been responding, etc. That wasn't the case. So when you jump to conclusions, we have to check the reality. We are much more likely to jump to conclusions negatively as well if we do lack confidence. A generic example I give, think about this one for yourself. You're walking along the street and opposite you is your elderly neighbour Bob walking in the other direction. And you call across, morning Bob, and he doesn't answer for some reason or another. Now, if we lack confidence and self-belief, we'll then probably overanalyze that a lot and start to think in ourselves, he didn't answer. I wonder why he didn't answer. I must have upset him. I've done something. Actually, now I think about it, I don't think he waved to me when I put my hand up at the weekend when we were cutting the grass. I'm sure he didn't wave back to me. God, I've really, really done something wrong. I haven't seen him much. I haven't been round much. I've obviously upset him. Oh, God, it's all me. It's something to do with me. I've done something. He doesn't like me. We internalise it and personalise it as something to do with us. Whereas somebody with high confidence will walk along the pavement and call out to Bob, "Morning, Bob," and he doesn't answer for whatever reason. And that person may well think, "Oh, Bob didn't answer. I wonder what's up with him." Actually, he didn't look himself today. He didn't look well at all. I haven't seen him out and about for a while. I'll call in this afternoon and have a cup of tea with him and see if there's anything I can do to help. So they see it as something to do externally with either Bob himself or something else. Or they'll think, "Oh, Bob didn't answer. I wonder what's up with him. Hey-ho," and not give it another thought. They won't overanalyze it at all. They move on, let it go. So is this something that you fall victim to? Do you jump to conclusions negatively and try and guess what's going on and usually see it as something to do with you? The truth is, we don't know why Bob didn't answer. It could have been many, many reasons. It could have been he's just won the lottery and he's rushing off to get his winnings. It could have been that he'd had a terrible night, he's in a lot of pain and he's getting himself down to the doctor's surgery. It could have been that his car's just broken down and he's rushing to the local garage to try and get the recovery service. Or perhaps he's deaf and the wind was blowing in his ears and he didn't have his hearing aid with him and he just simply didn't hear you. Or many, many other possibilities. The likelihood is, and the probability is, that it has absolutely nothing to do with you. And that's generally the situation. That's generally the reality. And we've got to not jump to conclusions and decide that they'll think this or what if they'll think that. A, we cannot control their thoughts. B, we have no way of knowing. And C, most of the time, who cares anyway? If they're not anybody important, if it's just a group of strangers in town, who cares what you're wearing or what you look like? Or don't worry about what the teenagers do this. They'll think this of me. I can't wear that. They'll think so and so. Who cares? Who are they? So we've got to get this into context and stop doing it and either consider what are more likely to be the situation, the reasons for the situation, or let it go and not overanalyze it. The last one then of the toxic thought patterns is catastrophizing. The catastrophic thinking. It'll be just a disaster. I'll mess it up. I'll forget my words. I'll fall off the side of the stage. There's no point writing a book. No one will want to read it. No, I'm not going to set up this business idea I've got because it'll be a disaster and I'll go bankrupt in a year. No one will want to buy from me, or etc., etc. All catastrophic thinking. And often when I'm with a client, I'll say, "How do you know? What happens if it is a success? What happens if you do get that job and you love it? What happens if you do speak up in that meeting and it goes really well and actually you've suggested a real solution and they run with it? What happens if you do write a book and it does fly off the shelf, does really well and you really enjoy it and people do want to read it? What happens if you do achieve X, Y, and Z and that parachute jump and raise lots of money for charity and you are a success and you do enjoy it?" And often they haven't even considered that. They have concentrated so much energy and effort into running a movie in their head of what could go wrong. They haven't even considered how it might feel and look were it to go right. So one certainty in life is catastrophic thinking. It'll just be a disaster. I'll be rubbish. I won't be any good at this. I'll mess it up. What that does for you, in fact, is hold you back. And it means you won't even try, which means you'll never know if that company will work or that book will sell or they'll respond well to you in the meeting or you'll get that job in the interview. And so therefore you won't try it. And therefore you get what you most fear. You basically get the failure that you feared in the first place, because there's one certainty in life: if you don't try, you'll never succeed, which means the other side of that is you failed. So the irony here is just, it's insane. We've got to banish the catastrophic thinking by stopping it, thinking about the possibility of it going well, concentrating on what that could look like, will look like, you want it to look like, you want it to feel, and then throwing your efforts into how can you make that happen. Go into solution mode. Increasing at every step, therefore, your possibility of succeeding, rather than worrying about it, holding yourself back, never trying, and therefore failing. So those are the toxic thought patterns. I've covered them all, given examples of each. My parting question to you is, which one or ones did you most relate to? Are there any that you are regularly running in your head? And if there are, then your homework or your key takeaway from this is to stop them, change them, override them, and get rid of them. Banish toxic thinking, that it is not helping you. If you are doing the all or nothing, you've got to look for counter evidence. If you're overgeneralizing, you've got to look for the reality of the situation. How often, how many, when? Have you ever? Yes. Minimize the positives has to go, and you've got to enjoy the positives and welcome them in and invite them in. Ban the should statements. No longer jump to conclusions. How do you know? What else, in fact, could have been a reality? Think of all the possible 50, 100 other possible reasons and put it into context. And stop the catastrophic thinking, and instead run movies in your head of how it could be, how you'd like it to be, how it will be when it goes right. So spend some time, again, a little bit like last week, by going into your head again and listening to what you're thinking, and notice if there are any of these. Also, be very wary and very aware of what you're saying in your language, because you will verbalize these in your sentences. So you could get somebody else to flag up if you tell them about these, and get a loved one or a friend to flag up if they hear you saying it. So they could help work with you, or get a coach, or drop me a line if you like, and I will be able to help you through coaching via Skype or FaceTime or telephone, or even face-to-face if you are fairly close in Hampshire. So give it some thought, record them in your notebook, notice the patterns if you're running them frequently, record them, and then... Well, we've come to the end of today's Life Coaching on the Move podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. If you found today's content helpful, then please rate and review the podcast. Just take a few seconds to write a review, because that increases the chances of other people finding and subscribing too. And they may well find all the tips and techniques as helpful in their lives as you have. Please join me again on next week's Life Coaching on the Move podcast, where again my aim will be to help you to shake things up a little bit. From doing things through routine and not questioning them, and not considering whether there are better, more helpful ways of doing things. In the same way as those tiny little snow domes. Do you remember those that we used to have as children? A little scene in a plastic pod that if you shook it, all the snow would move around and settle in a different scene. And that's my aim with this podcast. I want to shake things up a little bit for you and throw in some new techniques and some new ways that will change the outcome for your future. If there are any particular subjects you would like me to cover, then please feel free to drop me an email anytime on dawn@milestone-coaching.co.uk. You can ask me questions, you can share your thoughts, your learnings and your improvements with me, or you can send a topic request. Another way of contacting me anytime is through the website at www.milestone-coaching.co.uk and select the correct tab there for Contact Me. It'd be really good to hear from you. So join me next week, but until then, have a strong, determined and very confident week.